It starts with a joke, but it lands like a public execution. One single comment from 50 Cent, sharp, sarcastic, and perfectly timed, is all it takes to set the internet on fire again. Because this time, the target isn't just another random rapper, it's T.I. And the conversation dragging him into chaos is centered around claims involving his son and money troubles that the internet has completely latched onto. And the worst part? Nobody can tell where the joke ends. And where the humiliation begins. Within minutes, screenshots start spreading everywhere. Reaction pages explode. Comment sections turn into battlegrounds. And suddenly what looked like a simple celebrity jab transforms into a full-blown viral storm that everyone feels they need to pick a side on. But here's the twist that has everyone leaning in closer. Because this isn't just about one comment. It's about history. It's about ego. And it's about two of the most outspoken personalities in hip-hop culture circling each other again in a way that feels way too personal to be random. And now the question spreading across the internet is chillingly simple. Was this just trolling? Or the start of another public war? And trust me, what comes next makes this situation even messier than anyone expected. What's making this situation explode even more is the long, messy history behind it all. Because this isn't just a random joke thrown on the internet today. It's years of tension, ego clashes, public moments, and behind-the-scenes bitterness finally getting dragged back into the spotlight. At the center of it is 50 Cent, a man known for turning every controversy into content. He doesn't just respond to situations, he amplifies them. And that's exactly why even a small rumor becomes a global headline when his name is attached to it. Over the years, 50 Cent has built a reputation for trolling that feels almost strategic. He doesn't just make jokes, he picks moments when people are already vulnerable, already trending, or already under public pressure. And then he strikes with comments that are sharp enough to go viral within minutes. That's why this latest situation caught fire so fast. Because this time, the target wasn't just a rival artist or industry figure. It was T.I., someone who has also lived a very public life filled with success, controversy, family discussions, and moments where personal matters have spilled into public conversation. T.I. He has always been open about his image as a father, a businessman, and a rapper trying to balance fame with family responsibility. But that openness also means that any rumor involving his personal life spreads quickly, especially when it involves financial talk or family dynamics, and that's exactly where the internet latched on. Because the moment 50 Cent made that sarcastic remark, people didn't just see it as a joke. They saw it as confirmation of something bigger. Even though nothing officially verified exists around the claim being joked about, social media doesn't wait for confirmation anymore. It builds narratives instantly, especially when it involves two high-profile personalities with a history of public back-and-forth energy. And this is where the story deepens. Because this isn't the first time 50 Cent and T.I. have been mentioned in the same viral space. Over the years, they've existed in the same cultural orbit, sometimes indirectly clashing through interviews, sometimes reacting to industry drama in different ways, and sometimes just being compared by fans who love creating rivalries where none officially exist. But the internet doesn't need an official rivalry, it just needs tension. And once that tension exists, every joke becomes ammunition, every comment becomes proof, and every reaction becomes part of a larger imagined storyline. Now, adding fuel to this situation is the involvement of family-related speculation, particularly references circulating online about T.I.'s son. Again, none of these claims are officially verified, but they've been widely shared in memes, commentary clips, and reaction posts that blur the line between humor and misinformation. And that's what makes it so explosive. Because when family enters the conversation, even indirectly, the emotional weight increases instantly. What could have been a simple trolling moment suddenly becomes something people interpret as personal, targeted, and intentional. And 50 Cent knows this game better than almost anyone. He understands how fast the internet reacts. He understands how quickly narratives spread. And most importantly, he understands that silence from the other side often makes things even louder. Meanwhile, T.I. is placed in a difficult position because responding fuels the fire, but ignoring it allows the narrative to grow unchecked. That's the trap of modern viral culture. No response looks like weakness, but any response becomes content. And sitting in the middle of all this is the audience, watching, laughing, arguing, and reshaping the story with every repost. Memes start circulating. Reaction videos start multiplying. Old clips resurface showing past interviews, past jokes, past controversies, all reinterpreted through the lens of the current moment. And suddenly the internet is no longer talking about one comment. It's talking about an entire history that may or may not even be connected to the present situation. And that's when things start to escalate. Because once the past gets involved, the story stops being about what just happened and starts becoming a full biography of conflict, humor, ego, and interpretation. Which leads directly into the next phase, where the situation stops being a joke and starts becoming a full viral debate with public reactions, industry commentary, and divided fan bases. The moment 50 Cent's comments started circulating beyond just memes and reaction pages, the entire tone of the situation shifted. What was once a joke between fans suddenly turned into a full-scale online debate about respect, boundaries, and whether trolling had crossed a line. And at the center of that storm was T.I., who now found himself trending not for music, not for business moves, but for something completely unrelated, yet somehow still deeply personal in the eyes of the internet. At first, it looked like standard celebrity banter. A sharp comment from 50 Cent, followed by laughter, reposts, and people joking about how only 50 would say something like that. But within hours, the tone began to change. Because certain pages started attaching more serious framing to the situation, rewriting the joke as if it were part of an ongoing, real-life financial struggle narrative involving family issues. And that's where everything spiraled. Suddenly, what was originally a sarcastic remark was being reposted with captions implying deeper meaning. Words like exposed, confirmed, and insider claims started appearing, even though no credible source had verified anything of the sort. And once those words entered the cycle, the story stopped being comedy. It became controversy. Fans of T.I. quickly jumped into defense mode, arguing that the situation was being exaggerated beyond recognition. They pointed out that celebrities are constantly the target of jokes, and that social media often turns harmless humor into fake narratives. But on the other side, 50 Cent supporters saw it differently. To them, this was just another example of his signature style. Saying something outrageous, watching the internet explode and letting the chaos entertain itself, and neither side was willing to back down. That's when the first twist hit. A resurfaced clip began circulating. An old interview of T.I. speaking about family, responsibility, and financial pressure. The clip itself had nothing to do with the current rumor, but it was edited and recontextualized with dramatic captions that made it feel like it was directly connected to the present situation. Viewers who had no context started believing it was evidence supporting the ongoing narrative. And that changed everything, because now the conversation wasn't just about a joke anymore. It was about patterns. People began saying things like, "This explains everything now. It's all connecting." 50 wasn't joking, he was hinting. And that's how misinformation spreads fastest, not through lies, but through reinterpretation of unrelated truth. Meanwhile, 50 Cent did what he always does in situations like this. He leaned into the attention. More posts, more reactions, more indirect comments that kept the algorithm feeding on engagement. And every new post reignited the debate. But here's where things got even more complicated. Because now, other celebrities and commentators started weighing in. Not directly addressing the claim, but reacting to the phenomenon of how quickly the internet had escalated a joke into a full narrative. Some called it entertainment culture. Others called it dangerous misinterpretation. But either way, everyone was watching. And that visibility made the situation feel even bigger than it actually was. At the same time, discussions around T.I. became more emotionally charged. Fans began digging through old clips, interviews, and performances, trying to understand the context behind the joke, even though there was no confirmed event to understand in the first place. And that's when the second layer of chaos appeared. A viral thread started claiming that the joke had originated from a misunderstanding involving multiple private conversations. But again, no evidence was provided. Still, the phrasing alone was enough to push the story further into speculation territory. Now people weren't just reacting, they were theorizing. And once theory replaces fact, every detail becomes flexible. Even silence, even denial, even comedy. At this point, 50 Cent became the symbol of unpredictability in the story. Not because of anything confirmed, but because his reputation made everything he said feel like it could have a double meaning. And that perception alone kept the cycle alive. The twist wasn't a revelation of truth. It was the realization that truth no longer mattered to the speed of the story. What mattered was engagement, emotion, reaction, and interpretation. And just when it seemed like things might cool down, the situation escalated again, this time into public reactions and industry voices that turned the entire internet into a divided arena. At this point, the situation stopped feeling like a normal online joke and started feeling like a full-blown internet argument that nobody could shut off. What began with a sarcastic remark from 50 Cent had now turned into something way bigger than anyone expected. Not because the original moment was huge, but because the reaction to it kept multiplying every hour. Across social media, people were no longer just laughing or reacting casually. They were picking sides, building arguments, and turning the entire thing into a debate about respect, intention, and how far celebrity humor should go. On one side, supporters of T.I. were frustrated. They kept pointing out that the situation was being exaggerated beyond recognition. To them, it wasn't a serious issue at all. Just another example of how quickly the internet turns jokes into fake drama stories. They argued that people were reading too deeply into something that was never meant to be taken literally in the first place. But on the other side, 50 Cent's audience saw it completely differently. They treated the moment as part of his personality. His well-known pattern of making bold, sarcastic comments that immediately spark reactions. For them, it wasn't about truth or seriousness. It was about entertainment, timing, and the way he dominates online attention without even trying too hard. And that clash of perspectives is exactly what made everything explode even more. Because now it wasn't just about one comment anymore. It was about interpretation. Meanwhile, discussions around Lil Che started appearing in unrelated threads, not because anything new involved him had surfaced, but because users began pulling different names into the same conversation loop. Some were trying to connect dots that didn't really exist, while others were simply reacting to viral posts without checking context. And just like that, another name got pulled into the growing storm of speculation. But the most interesting shift happened with silence. Because neither side fully clarified anything, silence itself started being treated like evidence. People began saying things like, if it wasn't true, they would have denied it already, even though that logic doesn't actually hold up in real-world situations. Still, in viral culture, silence often gets interpreted as meaning more than words ever could. And that's where things got even more chaotic. Old clips started resurfacing again. Interviews, podcast moments, and past jokes involving both personalities. None of them were directly related to the current situation, but they were being edited, cropped, and reposted with captions that made them feel connected. Context disappeared completely, replaced by emotional framing designed to get reactions. At the same time, T.I. became the center of defensive conversations online. His supporters were actively pushing back against narratives forming around him, saying the internet was once again turning a simple joke into something personal. But the more they defended, the more attention the topic gained, which only fueled more discussion from the other side. And then came the turning point in public perception. A wave of commentary posts began suggesting that the situation wasn't really about the joke at all anymore. Instead, it had become a reflection of how quickly audiences can take fragmented information and build entire emotional narratives around it. That idea split the internet again. Some people agreed immediately, saying this was exactly how online culture behaves now. Fast, emotional, and often disconnected from verified truth. Others rejected that idea completely, insisting there must be something real behind the intensity of reactions, even if it hadn't fully come out yet. And both sides kept arguing, feeding the cycle further. Even 50 Cent continued to sit at the center of attention without adding anything new, because at this point, it wasn't about new statements anymore. It was about interpretation of old ones. Every past comment he had ever made was being re-examined, like it held hidden meaning relevant to the current wave of discussion. And that's when the situation reached a strange realization phase online, and people slowly started admitting that different versions of the story were circulating at the same time. And none of them fully matched each other. One group saw it as harmless trolling. Another saw it as disrespect. Another saw it as overreaction fueled by algorithms. But none of those groups could fully win the argument, because there was no fixed version of the truth being universally accepted anymore. Only competing interpretations. And once that happens, the story stops being about what actually happened, and starts being about what people believe could have happened, which is exactly why the conversation refuses to die down. Even now, even without new updates, even without confirmation, it just keeps looping. Waiting for the next comment, the next post, or the next spark to bring it all back again. At this point, the situation has moved into a strange phase where it's no longer about one comment or one moment anymore. It's about how long the internet can keep something alive just by talking about it. What's happening now around 50 Cent and T, I feels less like breaking news and more like a never-ending discussion that keeps restarting itself in different forms. Every few hours, the tone shifts again. One moment it's jokes and memes. Next moment it's debate and analysis. Then suddenly it turns into deep explanation threads where people try to connect unrelated past events just to make the current situation feel bigger than it actually is. And each cycle pulls more people in. That's what makes it so hard to escape. Because even people who weren't originally involved in the conversation start seeing it pop up on their feeds, and once they see it, they react. Even if it's just a comment, a laugh, or a quick opinion. And that reaction feeds the algorithm again. Meanwhile, Lil Che is still being casually mentioned in unrelated discussion threads. Not because anything new has happened, but because viral conversations tend to group names together once they enter the same trending space. It doesn't always make sense logically, but emotionally it feels connected to people scrolling quickly through content. And that's the key thing here. Speed over accuracy. Nobody is slowing down to verify anything anymore. They're reacting first, thinking later, or sometimes not thinking at all, just engaging. Even the silence from everyone involved has now become part of the conversation again. Some users treat it like mystery. Some treat it like strategy. Others treat it like proof that there's more to come. But in reality, silence is just silence. It's the internet that keeps giving it meaning, and that meaning keeps changing. One day it's just trolling. Next day it's serious disrespect. Then it becomes industry tension. Then it becomes nothing at all, just overreaction. And all those versions exist at the same time, fighting for attention in different corners of the internet. That's why even smaller commentary creators are still covering it. Not because anything new is happening, but because engagement is still there. And as long as people are clicking, watching, and arguing, the cycle continues. At this stage, T.I. is not just reacting to a joke anymore. He's part of a larger internet pattern where personal image, public perception, and viral humor all collide and get reshaped by audiences in real time. And 50 Cent remains the central figure in that pattern. Not because of constant action, but because of how his personality fits perfectly into viral culture. Sharp, unpredictable, and always capable of restarting attention with just a few words. But here's where things quietly change again. Because after all the debates, all the memes, all the arguments, and all the theories, a different kind of reaction starts appearing. Not outrage, not jokes, not analysis, but fatigue. People start saying they're seeing it everywhere, that it's going in circles, that there's nothing new anymore. And that's the first real sign that the cycle is reaching its natural limit. Because viral moments don't end when truth is revealed. They end when attention moves on. And right now, attention is starting to drift, slowly, quietly, toward the next trending topic already forming in the background of the internet. Which means this entire situation is entering its final phase. Not a conclusion, just a fade out. Waiting for the next spark to replace it completely. At this point, the conversation is no longer building toward anything new. It's just repeating itself in slightly different forms, like a loop that keeps restarting every time someone brings it back up. What started with a single sarcastic moment from 50 Cent aimed at T, has already gone through every stage the internet knows how to create. Jokes to reactions to arguments to theories to overanalysis to fatigue. And now it's sitting right at the edge of disappearing, but not completely gone yet. Because that's how viral cycles usually end. Not with a final answer, but with silence slowly taking over the noise. Right now, even the discussion around CelebTea feels like it's fading back into the background. Not because anything was resolved, but because people have simply stopped adding new energy to it. The mentions are still there, but they're not spreading the way they were before. They're just floating around in old threads and leftover conversations. And that's the key shift. When a topic stops growing, it starts shrinking without anyone officially noticing. The same thing is happening across all platforms. Less new posts, fewer reaction videos, slower comment activity, long gaps between updates, and instead of fresh interpretations, people are now just repeating what has already been said, almost like echoing a conversation that finished earlier, but nobody realized it ended. Even discussions about TI have now split into two groups. One group still debating what the original joke meant, and another group that has already moved on mentally, only occasionally checking back when it reappears on their feed. Meanwhile, 50 Cent is still being mentioned, but in a completely different tone now. Not as a trigger of chaos, but as a reminder of how quickly the internet can turn one comment into an entire storyline, and then slowly burn itself out without ever reaching a final truth. And that's the final realization spreading quietly across the remaining discussions. Nothing was ever fully confirmed, nothing was ever fully denied, and nothing was ever officially concluded. It was just a moment that the internet grabbed, stretched, reshaped, and eventually exhausted itself on. And now, even as attention shifts elsewhere, this situation is doing what all viral moments eventually do. It's fading out. Not because it ended, but because something new is already starting somewhere else. At this point, there's almost nothing left adding fuel to the fire. The story has already gone through every possible phase the internet can create. Hype, confusion, overanalysis, debate, and finally that slow, quiet drop in attention where people start caring less without even realizing it. What's left now around 50 Cent and TI isn't new information. It's just echoes. Old posts still floating, old clips still being reposted, old arguments still being replayed by accounts that didn't even see the beginning of it all. And that's usually how you know a viral cycle is finishing. Not when people stop talking completely, but when they stop adding anything new to what they're saying. Even the discussion around CelebTea has now become background noise. It's there, but it's not growing anymore. It's not spreading into new spaces. It's just sitting in older threads, slowly losing visibility as newer topics take over feeds. And that shift is happening everywhere at once. Comment sections that were once explosive are now calmer. Reaction videos are getting fewer views than before. Hashtags are no longer trending, they're just existing. And people who were deeply involved just a few days ago are now casually scrolling past it like it belongs to yesterday's internet. But what makes this moment interesting is what it leaves behind. Because even though the conversation is fading, the pattern it created doesn't disappear. People saw how fast a joke could turn into a full narrative, how quickly interpretations could replace facts, and how easily silence could be turned into meaning. That awareness doesn't go away, it just gets stored for the next time something similar happens. And that's why this whole situation doesn't feel like a final ending. It feels more like a lesson the internet doesn't fully admit it learned. Meanwhile, 50 Cent remains the figure people reference when talking about how quickly online chaos can start from almost nothing. And TI remains the center of the joke that slowly turned into something far bigger than it ever needed to be. But even that attention is shrinking now. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just gradually. It's like a wave pulling back into the ocean after it has already hit the shore. And in its place, something else is already forming in the background of social media. The next topic, the next clip, the next moment that will repeat the same cycle all over again. Because in the end, nothing really ends on the internet. It just gets replaced. At this point, there's no new twist coming, just the final phase where the internet fully moves on, even if the conversation still lingers in small pockets. What started with a single sarcastic moment involving 50 Cent and T.I. has now officially reached that stage every viral situation eventually hits, where the hype is gone but the memory of it is still floating around. You'll still see fragments of it here and there. Reposts, old clips, random comment references. But the energy that once made it feel massive has completely dissolved. Even discussions that briefly pulled in names like Lil J have stopped evolving. They're no longer part of an active conversation. They've turned into leftover echoes of a trend that already finished its run. And that's the reality of how these cycles work. Nothing truly explodes forever online. It burns fast, it spreads wide, and then it slowly disappears without a clear ending. Just less attention every hour until it stops feeling relevant. Right now, that's exactly what's happening. People are no longer debating what the joke meant. They're no longer arguing about intent or interpretation. They're just not engaging the same way anymore. The cycle has completed itself, and what remains is only awareness. The understanding that it was never as solid as it looked in the moment. Meanwhile, 50 Cent and T.I. Will still be mentioned from time to time, but now only as a reference point. An example people use when talking about how quickly online culture can turn a simple comment into a massive wave of speculation. But even that reference will fade with time, because the internet never stays in one place for long. And just like that, this chapter quietly closes. Not with a final answer, not with a resolution, but with the attention simply moving somewhere else. And the next viral moment already waiting to begin. At this point, there really isn't a next big event left in the storyline. This is the final wrap-up phase where everything fully settles. What remains around 50 Cent and T.I. is just residual attention. Small mentions, recycled clips, and occasional commentary posts that briefly bring the topic back before it fades again. Even the earlier buzz that pulled in names like Lil J has completely stopped evolving. No new angles, no fresh interpretations, no rising arguments. Just leftover references sitting quietly in older discussions. And that's the final stage of every viral cycle. Not drama, not resolution, just disappearance through repetition loss. The posts still exist, but they don't travel anymore. The comments are still there, but they're no longer growing. The conversation technically hasn't ended. It has just stopped spreading. And that's what makes this moment important in a different way. Because it shows how quickly attention can build something massive out of almost nothing, and then leave it behind just as fast when something newer appears. One moment, the internet is fully locked in. Next moment, it's already halfway somewhere else. And by the time people look back, it feels smaller than it ever did while it was happening. That's exactly where this situation is now. A finished cycle, a closed wave. Still visible if you look for it, but no longer moving forward. And as attention continues shifting across platforms, this entire story quietly slips into the background. Not erased, not forgotten instantly, just replaced. Waiting only to be mentioned again someday as that moment when the internet overreacted to a joke and turned it into a whole storyline. And then even that will eventually fade too. There isn't really a next chapter left in the storyline. This is the true ending phase where everything fully winds down. What's left around 50 Cent and T.I. is just background noise now. The viral energy has already peaked. The arguments have already been replayed 100 different ways, and the internet has quietly shifted its attention elsewhere. Even the earlier mentions tied to Lil J are no longer part of an active discussion. They've settled into old posts, forgotten threads, and recycled clips that only resurface occasionally when someone new discovers them and briefly revives the conversation. And that's the final truth about how these moments work online. They don't end with closure, they end with exhaustion. People stop arguing not because everything is answered, but because nothing new is left to say. The same points have been repeated, the same theories have been dissected, the same jokes have already circulated enough times that they lose their impact. So instead of a final reveal or dramatic conclusion, what happens is something quieter. Why? The engagement slows down, the reposts thin out, the comment sections stop refreshing as often, and little by little the topic stops feeling current. It doesn't disappear completely, it just loses momentum. And once momentum is gone, even the biggest viral storms start to feel like distant echoes of something that happened back then. That's where this situation is now. Not unresolved, not ongoing, just finished in the way internet stories always finish, by being replaced. Because somewhere else, a new clip is already gaining traction. A new name is already starting to trend. A new cycle is already forming without waiting for the old one to close properly. And that's the pattern, again and again. What feels huge today becomes memory tomorrow. And eventually, just another example of how fast attention moves online. Before you leave this video, let's be real for a second. What you just witnessed isn't just another celebrity gossip story. It's a full internet storm that shows how fast things can spiral when millions of people start reacting at the same time. And now the question is, do you believe what really happened here? Or is this just another case of the internet running wild with assumptions? Because when it comes to 50 Cent and T.I., nothing ever stays simple. Every joke turns into a debate. Every comment turns into a headline. And every small moment turns into a full-blown online war. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think this whole situation was just harmless trolling that got blown out of proportion? Or do you think there's always something deeper behind these viral celebrity moments that we never fully get to see? Yeah, drop your opinion in the comments. No filters, no holding back. Let's see whose team just a joke and whose team there's more to this story. And one more thing. If you're still here, you already know you're into this kind of raw, unfiltered celebrity chaos. So don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the next story that drops might be even crazier than this one. We're talking about situations where one clip changes everything, and the internet loses its mind all over again. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Because in this world of fame, music, and power, the real story is never the one you see first. See you in the next one.